The most exciting time of the year, it seems, Marcus, at least when it's not the opening week of hockey season, might in fact be the lead up to free agency. The Puckleheads back in action, as I like to always say, West Coast, East Coast, everywhere in between. Marcus, how are we today?
Doing very well on this here Wednesday, June 28th, 2017. Got 4 days before free agency starts. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yeah, 3 days. So my math was off. But 3 days before free agency.
You've been out of college for a year, Marcus. It's like,
yeah,
math,
you don't need math.
that's
the last math class I took was open note anyway.
So, so was mine. That's my sophomore year statistic.
So that's where I stand. Yes, but it's gonna be an interesting summer, I think, for sure. I'm very excited to see what happens. Had a couple fun drafts last week. We should start with the first one, the expansion draft. There was a lot of talk going in about how Vegas was going to maybe try and build a team that was playoff worthy. They certainly did not do that, which I think was probably their wisest decision. What did you think of their expansion draft, Connell?
I like their strategy, Marcus, and I think we've talked about in the past. I think they need to build for the future. The last thing you need to do as an expansion team is try to just be necessarily automatically competitive year 1 or 2 or 3. I think this is a long-term process, right? You're not planning to win here in the first 2 or 3 years. This is a big picture project for Vegas, especially in a market that I think has a built-in appeal, I should say, almost out of town fan base for the first 2 or 3 years. I don't think you have to worry about that. They sold all those season tickets, and then every out of town person like myself who has already booked his ticket to Las Vegas is.
When are the Rangers playing there?
I got a great plan actually. I'm going to see Greg in Phoenix, and then we're driving up to Vegas. So I get to see the Rangers in Phoenix. That's next January, the week after New Year's. Yes,
nice.
So it'll be a lot of fun, but you have a lot of people who are going to be doing the same thing. So you know what? Make this team ready for the future. A lot of these picks, Marcus, they were able to acquire some draft picks. They got, 3 second-round picks we were talking about in 2019 and 2020. They acquired many other draft picks. They stockpiled
3 first-round picks at this year's draft.
I know. They did a fantastic job with that. And then on top of that, they stockpiled defensemen. A lot of people talked about stockpiling goalies. They've already moved a couple in Mark Mathot and your boy from the Sharks, whose name just escaped me.
David Slemko.
I don't know why I couldn't put. I wanted to say Goodrow. I was like Goodrow, but I was like, that's not the right one. And there's another one out there. So they're already moving a couple, Marcus. Outside of that, they'll be an average team. They'll probably finish 12th in the West. I mean, nothing special there. But you know what? They're building for the future. On the whole, I think George McPhee and Vegas got it right.
Yeah, I think they did a really good job. I think they were kind of hamstrung in terms of the assets that they had to flip. You saw that in the low prices they got for Mark Mathot and for David Schlemko. You saw how little teams are giving up. I mean, a 5th-round pick in 2019 for Schlemko. The Mathot price escapes me, but that's when you have 30 players and you have to take one from each roster. That's what's going to happen when you have guys in excess, like they do, like Las Vegas does. So I think they handled it perfectly. I was a little surprised, I think, what they did in net. I was, Fleury obviously being the big one, but definitely surprised they went Calvin Pickard to back him up. Not that I think Pickard's bad. He was not linked to them nearly as much as, Philip Grubauer or Antti Ranta were.
They certainly left some solid goalies off the board.
Yeah, which I think is probably smart. You want to be bad. You want to get, you want to have a good pick next year. I think that's smart. And I like some of the other players they brought in. I think James Neal is very flippable. I think Jonathan Marchessault is very flippable too. I think they can get, those are guys that are both going to be free agents next year in 2018. Those are probably going to be 2 of the best, most coveted forwards at the trade deadline, if not sooner. When I saw that the Panthers were willing to give up Marchessault, I was a little surprised, but maybe I shouldn't have been, given their just a weird place with their organization last summer, embracing analytics, which didn't completely pay off this year. But I think you can argue, as I do, that was almost entirely because of injuries. If Alexander Barkov and Huberdeau are healthy the whole year, I think that team probably makes the playoffs.
Probably do.
I mean, Ottawa certainly had some luck, but the Panthers were really good once those guys came back. Kind of faltered a little bit down the stretch, but the hole they'd already dug themselves at that point was difficult to overcome. Yeah, I like the picks that Vegas made. I think they handled it properly, getting 3 first-round picks in their first draft. I know it was a supposedly weak draft, but I really like Nick Suzuki. I thought that was a really good pick. And I think they got some other good pickups as well. Nate Schmidt, I thought was a really shrewd pickup. He's a restricted free agent. Shea Theodore didn't play a lot last year because of concussions, but I was just, speaking with one of my friends, there's even a chance he's healthy. That guy's good enough that you're willing to take roll the dice. They're in a position where they can roll the dice on some players, and I think they're in a really interesting position for their franchise. As you said, they're not going to contend, but as we'll talk about later in the show, I think they could be a player with some of these restricted free agents here. Obviously the pick, it all depend on the pick situation, but I think they could be a player to maybe make some offer sheets for RFAs. They have, they got 29 guys under contract, I think, and they have, $8,700,000 in cap space, and that's without Grabowski or David Clarkson on long-term injured reserve. So I think that night last Wednesday went about as well as you could have expected if you're a new Vegas Golden Knights fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an exciting time for them. And they're going to be able to build this roster. As you said, I think we talked about the potential for the future with them. They have all these pieces, Marcus, that they're going to be we see how desperate teams get at the trade deadline. And what is flop for a second-round pick, potentially a first-round pick, if a team really thinks – look, I mean, we talked about Minnesota last year trading a first-round pick for a Martin Hansel, a guy like that. So you see how desperate teams can get. Vegas can only – they have 3 first-round picks this year. They did a great job with that, and they're only going to have a chance to improve this prospect pool, Marcus. Marcus, fun question to ask, because Devils Insider Kevin Winstanley and I were discussing this. I'm going to put the over on – Kevin said – the Knights are going to win a cup within the first 10 years of their franchise. I said, okay, let's put some Vegas odds on it. I'll give you 7.5 years. 7.5 is over or under?
I take the over.
Still taking the over. Would you go under 10?
It's just so hard to win a Stanley Cup, and it's so hard to predict that far out. I mean, I think when the Penguins won their first Stanley Cup in 2009, everyone was thinking, okay, they're going to win the next, 5. They've only won 2 since. Chicago, another team. Yeah, I feel confident taking the over. I'd say within the first 20 years. But I think they're definitely, of all the expansion teams, they're in the best position to succeed the soonest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for
sure. You look at the expansion draft the Sharks had, or even as late as the Wild or the Blue Jackets, not the same. Although, the Wild are probably the bar for them to surpass. The Wild made a conference final, I want to say 3 years after they joined the league as an expansion.
Yeah, 99, sorry, 09, 10. Jeez, I'm old. 99, 2000 was their first year, and they were in the 02, 03. They made it to the conference finals.
Right, yeah. So I think that's probably, that's the bar that can be cleared. They're certainly in a good enough position, I think, to do that. Like I said, I like some of those picks, and I really, really like their draft. I think a lot of people were saying that they had maybe the best draft of anybody. This year. They just nailed it on all of their picks. Nobody was a reach. Everybody either fell to them or they were slotted properly. So, I think 10 is ambitious. When it comes to that, I'm a more conservative person. So I'm going to take the over, but I think within 15 is certainly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fun prospect to look at, but I think you really, I don't know if you'd feel safe about making any bets, at least until 3 or 4 years in, when you see the development of the roster, when you really see it coming here, Marcus. Looking at the expansion draft real quick here, Marcus. Any real surprises as far as I think they were hamstrung by teams. Well, I wouldn't say hamstrung, but teams were desperate to keep certain players. We saw Columbus, how desperate they were, giving up a first, a second. The Islanders giving up a first-round pick. So a lot of teams really going for it. I mean, is Marchessault just the obvious pick as the best guy they took?
Yeah, I think Marchessault or James Neal are the best players picked, for a variety of reasons. Neal probably being the best player, Marchessault easily being the best value on that roster. I mean, the guy's still signed for $750,000 this year, which is going to make him very tradable at the deadline, and Vegas can ask for a lot because I'd imagine every team that is going to want a goal scorer at the trade deadline can fit that salary in.
That's a first-round pick right there.
Yeah. Oh, I think there one team will pay that. One of 29 teams will pay that price. Mm-hmm. Especially because he's probably not going to be super expensive as a UFA off of that deal anyway. So I think you can get a lot. I was surprised by I was more surprised by who teams protected, frankly.
That was more, I think that was the biggest shocker for me coming down to it.
I think I think we touched on it last week too. Were we able to talk about the protected list?
We talked about Matt Martin and then our boy Ryan Reeves,
Ryan Reeves, who we'll touch on in a little bit. Some of those protected lists were more shocking. But I wasn't. I guess the biggest surprise was probably in net where Vegas went. They went with Berube and they went with Picard. I don't think that's a bad trio per se. And
Berube is probably more of in the Bry process as well.
Yes. Hey, don't take Thomas Greiss or don't take Yaro Halak from us. I really expected Vegas to go expensive there, but they're gonna have some options. But nothing. Once the protected list came out, this is kind of what I expected from. I don't think there were any players that it was like, oh man, why didn't Vegas pick them? They had a pretty limited pool to work with, although that limited pool is bigger than what any other expansion team has had to work with in their history.
True. Very true. Very true here. All right. Good stuff with the expansion draft. Like I said, not too many shocks there. As we move into it then, Marcus. So that was last Wednesday night, NHL Awards. No real shocks there. I guess my one debate, I would have taken Erik Karlsson over Brent Burns.
As would I. I think Burns had a pretty Loctite case, but this is more of a hypocrisy from the PHWA perspective, considering Karlsson didn't get the award last year for the same reasons that Burns won the award this year. I think Burns was the most, one of the most dynamic defensemen in the league, and he was really, really good. You can't argue with his point totals.
100%.
But Karlsson was good defensively before, and he made an extra commitment to being better defensively because of some of the criticism he faced. And so for him to he lost the award. Like if it was Drew Doughty and Karlsson last year, Doughty wins the award. But this year it's Burns and Karlsson, Burns being the Karlsson being the Doughty. And Doughty doesn't win, especially given the team he had to carry. I know, Burns did a lot of carrying of the Sharks, but the Sharks are a better team than the Ottawa Senators. I would have given it to Karlsson as well. Although I was happy, Burns is the first Norris winner in Sharks history. It was definitely
it's great for the Sharks and good for Burns out there.
Cool to see him win that. Especially he won the award 3 days before the 6-year anniversary of his trade to San Jose. Cool. So kind of a cool full circle, with a lot of topsy-turvy turns in between. There was that brief stretch where he was the best power forward in the NHL when he played on Joe Thornton's wing, which was certainly fun. But nothing. I think Crosby had an MVP case too. I mean, McDavid was so good carrying a bad Edmonton team, but the Penguins really dealt with a lot of injuries this season, and Crosby misses the first 7 games but leads the league in goal scoring. He might have had one of the more impressive years of his career, but obviously you can't go wrong with Connor McDavid winning that award.
Yeah, it's hard to pick against him. Obviously, Matthews at the Memorial.
I also would have given to Jack Adams, not Torts.
I was going to say, well, there's my big thing. So Torts wins the Jack Adams. So we'll go through the list real quick. McDavid, Hart, Burn, which is the outright MVP. Ted Lindsay's most points. Ross is
Ted Lindsay's most outstanding.
Points. Ted Lindsay is like the players. Yes, sorry, it's like basically the same thing. I don't know why they have 2 awards.
Well, value and outstanding are different, and that's why I think the most outstanding, best player, most valuable to their team. I guess McDavid you could go either way, but
Bobrovsky wins the Vezina. Torts also gets a Jack Adams there. I'm with you. I would have given it to Babcock with Toronto. I think the turnaround there was tremendous. Bergeron with the Selke, got no argument there. Goudreau with the Lady Bing. I mean, that's,
the sportsmanship award.
Sportsmanship award, nothing too crazy there. Good for Craig Anderson with the Bill Masterson. Yep. I thought that was just well done. But I mean, that was a no-brainer. I mean, if it went to anybody else, I think it was just impressive there. Dave Pohl gets the General Manager of the Year award and all that fun jazz, and the rest are just kind of Nick Foligno with the Mark Messier Leadership Award. He's actually done some fantastic stuff. He donated $1 million to his foundation last year, which was absolutely fun. That's just out of his pocket. That's not even money raised Travis Hamonic with the Foundation Player Award with what he does with the bringing in the kids who have lost a parent. If you ever watched that East 60, that's an emotional one. Bring some tears, some tissues to that one. But good all around. Really don't have too much complaints this year. I didn't think there was much controversy otherwise, Marcus.
Yeah, I just think, the Jack Adams is officially the PDO award.
It's just garbage.
It's the team that overachieves. I mean, Babcock's never won a Jack Adams in his career.
Is that true?
I'll look at. I'll fact check right here.
I thought he won it with. I thought he won it with the Ducks. Am I wrong?
Did not. And that was a year you would have think they would have won it. They were the eighth. They were the 8th seed.
Oh my God! You win some, you lose some, I guess.
Yeah, Babcock has never won the Jack.
Yeah, I just looked it up too. I for some reason I thought he won it that year. I guess I was wrong. But hey, it's
the PDO Overachievement Award. Like it really is, and that's okay. But like that's something different than who's the best coach.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous.
And he had Connor McDavid, or excuse me, he had Austin Matthews come in. They had the young talent, but it's a testament to Babcock that they gelled that quickly. There's a good chance. Like, I think, what is it? Some of the last 3 before Tortorella Jack Adams awards. The 4 of the 5 before Tortorella, other than Barry Trotz, are no longer 5 of the 6 of the 7 because Tippett just left. 7 of the 8.
Keep going.
Julian.
Keep going.
8 of the 9 with Boudreau. 9 of the 10 with Vigneault. 10 of the last 11, and back to Torts, 11 of 12. None of them are with their teams anymore. Hartley, Juan, McLean were all fired so quickly after winning the Jack Adams Award. It's a dumb. It's the way it's voted on is dumb at this point.
Dumb. It's dumb.
Yeah.
It's very dumb. Yeah, I agree with that. I just didn't make sense with me to Torts. I would have given it to Babcock too. He would have been there. Hell, I would even.
McClellan was the 3rd nominee. For what? Having Connor McDavid on your team for a full season? I'm sorry.
I would have even, you could have argued to me. I would have put Laviolette in there again, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Put Laviolette there.
I think that absolutely would have made sense here. And more on, so we talk about the stupid Jack Adams Award. We can now go on to stupid trades that were made over the weekend, folks. I think it's a good segue. Marcus, a lot of moves, and we expected, I think, this because of the expansion draft and the way everything was working out. A benefit to some teams was the salary cap moving up to $75 million. The players moving up with their 2.5 escrow, not the full 5, will help some teams out. Marcus, some crazy trades over the weekend. A lot going on. Let's go back a little bit here. We'll start with some of the big names here. Obviously, Trevor Van Riemsdyk and the Knights, all that stuff from Carolina. Nothing crazy there.
Really like that for the Canes. They have a really, really good blue line.
They have a good blue line, and a Trevor Van Riemsdyk as your 5th or 6th guy, I think is a good defenseman. I thought I'm surprised they actually got a 2nd-round pick out of him, but that's another discussion. But let's move to the player-for-player trades, Marcus, here, because this is where it gets interesting. The Edmonton Oilers, who are a team who just cannot stay out of their own way, continuing to put their foot up their own rear ends. Jordan Eberle for Ryan Strome. Now, we know that they need to free up some cap space here to sign.
They did it this year.
They should have known that 3 years ago. I do that in my NHL GM mode. I don't think it's that difficult of a process to be like, hey, we got a good guy. Let's invest in him in the future. Let's free up cap space now. Instead, though, Marcus, they get rid of Jordan Eberle, a former 1st-round pick for them. Wow, a shocker, trading a 1st-round pick. I've never seen that coming. For Ryan Strome, who's a nice player. He's still relatively cheap. I get that from the Islanders' perspective there. But Ryan Strome, he's not nearly as good as Eberle. He had a good year 2 years ago. He's had a couple injuries. He's not nearly as good as Eberle. We know that. But Marcus, people then will say, well, Jordan Eberle, he's kind of expensive. He's making $6 million. They don't sign Milan Lucic and Chris Russell. Yeah. This is such a solvable problem here that it doesn't make sense. I don't get it. Another guy, he put up 51 points last year, 51, 47, 63, 65. He had 76 in his 2nd year. He's He's a pretty consistent top 6 forward in the NHL, and they just throw him away for a guy who's still yet to prove himself.
Yeah, they've now gotten rid of 2 top 6 wingers for a top 4 defenseman who was pretty good for them, but probably shouldn't cost Taylor Hall, and Ryan Strome, who I don't know if he's going to play on the wing. I don't know if he's going to play center. Yeah, the Edmonton Oilers, and we'll talk about this as we kind of preview free agency. Peter Chiarelli is really kind of screwing the pooch here and not setting Edmonton up for success later on. I understand maybe you want to get guys on cheap entry-level deals as opposed to guys on more expensive deals. But yeah, some of these I don't think he's made has he made a good acquisition?
No.
Since McDavid has been MVP, has he made a team where you're like, yes, this makes their team better unquestionably?
Nope. 100% no.
Yeah, I don't think you can do that.
The guy consistently trading another first-round pick away. He did this in Boston, obviously. He is now doing it in Edmonton. And now they have to worry about Leon Draisaitl because you're going to have to re-sign Connor McDavid. And now there's a worry that you're not going to be able to – I mean, if they lose Draisaitl, Marcus, I mean, how does this guy have a job? It is remarkable. And, blessing on Edmonton, they had a fantastic – a Vezina caliber year from Cam Talbot. And then they have literally an MVP caliber year from Connor McDavid. And they win the first round. They get to 7 games against the Ducks. We talked about, Marcus, in the past how playoff success sometimes can be a bad thing for a young franchise. Yeah. And I think you're seeing that as the case here. Oh, we made it to Game 7 against a good team in the Ducks, who's a conference final team. We pretty much should bring back the same roster. If that is your approach, you have already failed. Yeah. Chris Russell coming back at I think he's getting
$4 million a year for the next 3 years.
Is it $4 million? Okay. I mean, we've known Chris Russell's been on the decline probably for the past 5 years, let alone the past year.
He's probably never been at the peak.
He's probably never been that great, but regardless, bringing him back to think he's one of your
Oh, I'm sorry, Connell. He signed for 4 years. He has a no movement clause for the next 2, and then a modified no trade and no movement in the last 2 years of his deal.
Unbelievable. That's even worse. Somehow that Chris Russell deal just got worse. I'm pretty sure he had the $4 million, but yeah, I'm looking at it now as well. That is remarkable. Listen, Marcus, it comes down to it. There's a decent chance they lose Leon Draisaitl, and if that's the case, I mean, how this guy, as I said, if Peter Chiarelli should be fired. I mean, you bring in Lucic with that huge deal, $6 million for 5 more years, is it, or 6 more? 6 more years for Lucic. Right. That's $6 million. Okay. We talk about the Chris Russell trade. There's other ways they could have freed up cap space. There are absolutely other ways to do it. And, they get rid of Taylor Hall and they get rid of Jordan Eberle in this long process here. Marcus, think about this. If they were smart, they could have even kept Taylor Hall. They could have kept Jordan Eberle. And instead, they could have freed up some cap space. You don't sign Lucic. You waited out another year. And then all of a sudden they could sign, I don't know, Kevin Shattenkirk. And all of a sudden there's a blue line with a lethal forward group. You still have, Oscar Klefbom's a nice player there. You still got some.
He's really good. He's really, really good.
I mean, he's a nice player. He's on a good contract. Andre Sekera, I understand the concept of them making that trade, that's making that sign. And I get that to an extent. There's other ways they could have built this roster. They tried to force feed it down, had to have McDavid playing with guys. I mean, McDavid is 20 years old. I mean, like, the guy has so much life left. To think that you need to just put together a team right now, I mean, this is a 15-year picture they should be thinking with McDavid.
Right. I understand the want to, win now, especially when he's on his rookie deal. You want to strike while the iron's hot when you're not paying him a ton of money. But they surrounded him with the completely wrong kind of talent. I agree. I mean, Taylor Hall, you keep. Jordan Eberle, you keep. Maybe you trade Eberle for another piece, but you certainly keep Taylor Hall. And then, like you said, you wait. You're patient. You use the fact, McDavid's on a rookie deal. We can sign Kevin Shattenkirk to a 7-year, $49 million deal. It just feels like they're not planning. They're just reacting to what's available.
That's perfect.
It feels, there was some speculation that Brent Burns might want to sign there. reunite with Todd McClellan, that they might want to bring him up to Edmonton. It feels like they're reacting to what's available around them. And, you mentioned Draisaitl. I guess that's a good time to talk about him now. He's a restricted free agent. McDavid is rumored to have signed an 8-year, $106 million contract extension. That would be worth $13.25 annually. If Draisaitl's signed to an offer sheet, worth the maximum allowable, which is over $9,800,000, yes, the Oilers would get 4 first-round picks back if they didn't match. But if they did match, all of a sudden you're committing like $23 million to 2 guys. And with some of the contracts they have around them, that's not really that good of a scenario. The game has changed a little bit since when Kane and Taves and Crosby and Malkin first re-upped. But it's similar. It's a very similar percentage of the salary cap, and it's gonna force their hand. Either they let him walk, Draisaitl. That assumes, of course, that some NHL GM has the guts to sign him to a max offer sheet, which they should. Doug Wilson signed Nicholas Hjalmarsson to an offer sheet, and that didn't affect his ability to make trades with the Chicago Blackhawks. He's traded with them 2 or 3 times since. I know and Stan Bowman's still there. I know they're worried about maybe ruining relationships, but some team needs to have the guts to sign Draisaitl to an offer sheet. We talked about it before the show. Vegas is a team that's in a unique position to do that with their salary cap space, with the amount of picks they have coming in, and with the picks they can acquire. Yes, they wouldn't have first-round picks for the next 4 years if they made the maximum allowable offer. However, Draisaitl's 21 years old and a proven commodity at this point. I think if you're Vegas, that's a good investment. Or if you're one of these teams with salary cap space and picks to boot, a team like maybe Carolina, they've got some salary cap space. Team like Buffalo, perhaps, that could use another player.
Buffalo makes a lot of sense to me.
Eichel's still on his rookie deal. Yes, he'll need an extension, and you're going to be paying a lot for centers with O'Reilly as well. But you got to get, at some point, something's got to give with these teams. And I think, even if nobody does sign him to an offer sheet, now you're looking at, okay, are we going to have to move a 25-year-old, 26-year-old Ryan Nugent-Hopkins next summer who signed for 2 years, $12 million? You're not going to be able to move Milan Lucic with that kind of money. You're not going to be able to move Chris Russell, who's got a no-movement clause. Oh, did I mention that Milan Lucic also has a no-movement clause? You're basically at this point hoping for a lockout to come and to have a compliance buyout.
Yeah, you know what, Marcus, sadly to say, I wonder how many GMs actually think about that when they sign contracts, because it's fairly realistic down the line. Edmonton putting themselves in a bad position here, and you can't blame McDavid for getting the money he's going to deserve, and that's kind of how it works, man. That's how it works.
Some team would have signed McDavid to that offer sheet next summer, guaranteed.
Oh, 100%.
All you have to pay is that and four first-round picks. Where do I sign?
Yeah, absolutely. For 7 years of the best, probably the best player in the league, especially once Crosby hits the back end of his career. It doesn't make sense. This is an avoidable trade for Edmonton. You hope Ryan Strome could have success there. Good for the Islanders, who are trying everything they have here to keep Jonathan Tavares in New York City, Brooklyn, if you will. I think that's up in the air with them. Haven't heard much on the negotiations from that contract front at all, Marcus, especially being a New York market. If I ever do, I'll be sure to tweet it out. But they're trying their best to keep him. Islanders maybe trying to make a push this year that they can maybe make some bit of a playoff run. We'll see what happens. And then maybe, just maybe, they can keep Tavares long term. We'll see what happens here as we move forward with the trade deadline. Sorry, not trade deadline. The draft day trades here right around them. Next big one, Marcus. Arizona. We talked about Arizona, and they make 2 huge trades. One with my New York
firing their longtime coach.
Well, they fired pretty much everybody, Marcus. I don't even know if they have a concession sales manager right now.
Days after they're like Shane Doan not coming back, Dave Tippett not coming back.
Boom. They're just get rid of everybody. New horse. First of all, they go and they can't bring in Nicholas Hjalmarsson, who is an analytics darling, if you will, one of the best shutdown defense in the league. Still on a pretty good contract. I believe it's about $5 million, I want to say. $4 million. I'm going to bring it up real quick just to make sure I got it right. $4 million. Hjalmarsson's 2 more years. Modified, no trade. 4.1, 4.1 on the next 2 years for him. He's only 30 years old. Hell, they could keep him for another 2 years after that, 3 years after that, and it wouldn't be a bad deal. Hjalmarsson, a great player, could play on the top line. Apparently, they consulted their top player and now captain Oliver Ekman-Larsson to get him. In exchange for Connor Murphy, they get him. So obviously they get Hjalmarsson from the Blackhawks. Center Connor Murphy and Laurent Dauphin, two younger players. Murphy's had his ups and downs. Dauphin's still a pretty young player in the league. Marcus, what do you think of this trade? Well, actually, should we bring up both here before we go in and break them down here? Might as well bring them up. And so then the next trade they make, obviously, huge one with the Rangers. They trade Anthony DeAngelo and their 2017 first-round pick, which was number 7 overall, to the Rangers in exchange for Derek Stepan and Antti Raanta, two players I know very well here, Marcus. Derek Stepan, I guess, I think he's pretty much a legit 1A center in today's NHL. He puts up 50 points a year. That's what a top-line center really does in today's NHL, unless you have, obviously, a McDavid or a Crosby or something like that, a Kopitar. They get him, and they solidify goaltending with Antti Raanta, who's a obvious upgrade, in my opinion, over Mike Smith. That makes a lot of sense to me. Marcus, get a pretty legit first-line center. They get a top-pairing D, and they get a starting goaltender. Was it too much? Do you really understand what the direction they're going in? What do you think of the moves made by the Arizona Coyotes?
So I think there's an opportunity in the Pacific Division. We mentioned how mismanaged Edmonton is. LA didn't make the playoffs last year. Who knows what the Sharks are going to do this summer? The Ducks, I mean, we're good, but like it was kind of like a, okay, who's left thing. There's opportunity in the West. So I can understand that why Arizona would want to, strike while the iron's hot. I just am not sure if their young core is at the point where they're ready to take that step. I like the Hjalmarsson move a lot. I don't think they had to give up a lot for him, and I think he's a really good defenseman. And I like the Stepan and Raanta moves too for them. I think, a 7th overall pick is not too bad of a price to pay for, your starting goaltender and your, at worst, your number 2 center. And, DeAngelo, it seems like there were some issues there with him as a fit in Arizona. But I like that trade for them. But just considering the circumstances they're in, I'm not sure if this was the right time to push the chips in.
Do you think, Marcus, it was almost, I wouldn't say, PR move, but, almost a distraction from the fact that they just pretty much clean house, getting rid of their captain, getting rid of their coach, long-time coach and captain at that, pretty much the two faces of the franchise, the staples, and trying to bring in some fresh blood?
I don't think so, because I think they've probably had those deals in the works before. I don't think
apparently they've been kicking on Stepan for over a year now.
Yeah, I maybe there was an expediency to it, but I don't think they were like, okay, so we just got rid of everybody. What are the fans going to like? Quick, what trades are available, kind of a thing. So, in that case, I don't think it was a panic move. I just wonder why now. That's my biggest question. Why is now the time? Yes, Domi's good. They've got Duclair, but there's still a little bit of a ways away, from even potentially being a playoff team. I mean, you consider the wild card teams last year were Nashville, who went to the Stanley Cup final, and Arizona's far away from Nashville. And who was the second wild card in the West? I believe it was, who played the Ducks in the first round? Was it the Calgary Flames? The Flames look much improved now that they've just picked up Travis Hamonic. They have a great blue line, but they weren't a great team last year. They got swept, so there is opportunity there, and I think maybe within the next 2 or 3 years, they can get back to the playoffs. It's just, that's why I question now, because it's like, okay, are they really going to make that step anytime soon? But, I like that Chayka's aggressive. I like that he's, not just, he's accumulated assets and accumulated picks. It's not like the Sixers in the NBA like the Celtics in the NBA who have all these assets and they just are perpetually waiting to trade those assets. So, it's interesting for Arizona. I could see why they did it. I do question if now was the right time, but I don't think that does not make it a bad move, I should say.
Yeah, I think it made sense for Arizona in a lot of ways. And like you said, they've had years and years of gaining prospects and gaining picks. They still are so young. Larson Krause, Max Domi, Dylan Strong, all these guys, Christian Dvorak, they are still so young. I think giving up a first-round pick is okay once in a while, especially if you're going to improve the roster. Yeah. Like you said, at worst, the number 2 center. At the very least right now, he's the number 1 center. And then they get a starting goalie in Antti Raanta, who's still on a 1-year deal for $1 million. And if he does well, then you can extend him, and then it's an even bigger investment for them. So interesting from both parts. I really didn't think the Rangers were going to have the guts to trade Stepan, and they wound up doing it. We'll touch on that a little bit here, Marcus. The other big trade, the Blackhawks, every year, Marcus, it seems like they're making one of these big trades, and they're bringing back a familiar face, getting rid of Artemi Panarin, the bread man, who was the NHL's Calder Trophy winner just a year ago. Tyler Motte, a 6th-round pick in exchange for a Brandon Saad, Stanley Cup winner with the Chicago Blackhawks a few years ago, Anton Forsberg, and a 5th-round pick. Marcus, this one was a little bit more curious to me because it doesn't necessarily free up a ton of cap space for Chicago. It's just getting rid of the breadman, bringing back Saad. They wanted that power forward with the whole Marian Hossa situation, whether or not he's ever going to come back or not with the skin disorder. It's interesting. Did it make a lot of sense to you, Marcus? Because I thought the breadman fit pretty nicely there on that line with Kaner and Anisimov.
Yeah, I think it was I don't mind this move for them as much as I did the Hjalmarsson move. I thought the Hjalmarsson one didn't make a lot of sense considering who they got back. I don't think Murphy is really that good, and Dauphin is not anything to write home about. Frankly, I was wondering why the Sharks maybe didn't trade one of their lower defensemen and then a prospect and try and match that deal, because Hjalmarsson's very good. This one is different, though. I think Panarin's a very good player, but he's only signed for 2 more years. Saad is a really, really good winger. I think because he's played in Columbus, maybe people have forgotten that, and he hasn't played with Patrick Kane, the last couple of years to get those scoring numbers. But Brandon Saad's really, really good, and he signed for 3 more years. I like this move a lot more than I do the other one.
I would agree.
I still think, you got to, if you're Chicago, though, you should have just bitten the bullet and tried to trade Brent Seabrook instead of, and maybe they did, we're not privy to those behind the scenes discussions, but, I'm a little curious as to what, there seems to be an overvaluing of Brent Seabrook around the league and in the Chicago front office. I mean, that to me seems like the guy you give up. And that seems like a guy that you could have, Florida probably would have given you like Jason Demers for him back.
Yeah, I think
go
also ahead. with Saad, and people forget he's still only 24 years old. He's another one of these guys.
He's so young.
Still another one of these guys that, and you think, oh my God, he's been around for whatever 5 years or whatever it is. Well, yeah, it's because he came up when he was 19 years old, and when that happens, sometimes you forget how young these guys are. Sometimes I forget that Crosby's still that young. 30 years old. It's still crazy to me to even think that. So it's interesting move. I guess they just feel it's more of a long-term investment. Saad's still 6 more years on that contract. I believe the Panarin only has a year or 2 left on that contract. He signed 2 years, $6 million. So I think he's only got 1 more year left. 2 more years left. Okay, 17, 18. At $6 million also. I think it'll be an interesting fit in Columbus for Panarin. They get rid of Saad, a little bit more grit, maybe a little bit more of a tortsy guy. And now Panarin's certainly a lot more high-end skill than Saad. Brandon Saad is still a fantastic hockey player, as we were saying before. I don't mind it for Columbus' sake, and that they probably could use a little bit more skill in that lineup, Marcus. Just pure talent. Not that Saad doesn't have it, but there's a little bit more obvious pure talent, Panarin, if you will. Could be a nice fit there too. They kind of just bring back a familiar face, and it sounds like they want a more well-rounded guy to take the place of Hossa, who's, as we talked about before, is at least going to miss this season. And I'm screaming conspiracy again by the Chicago Blackhawks, who are now going to be able to possibly put him on long-term IR and get more cap relief. Conspiracy Chicago, I'm coming for you, Bettman. I know what you're trying to do. But interesting trade, nothing crazy. Marcus, of all 3 of those trades, which one was the most surprising to you? Which one did you not expect?
For Chicago?
Of all of those 3 trades we just talked about, they kind of circle around like 3 teams there. So
okay, so with the
the 2 Coyote trades and then Panarin for Saad.
Oh yeah. Man, that's a good question. I I think I was probably most shocked by the Yalmerson trade. I think, you think about.
I think the shocking part of that, Marcus, is the return value.
Yes, the return and that he was moved in general.
I agree.
Panarin, I'm not shocked. I am shocked that it was Saad coming back the other way, but Chicago love to bring the guys back that left their team due to cap mismanagement. Like, they love that. It's going to happen with Patrick Sharp again this summer. He's going to sign for $2 million, and he'll be back on the wing. They'll play sharp-dressed man at the United Center. Everything will be good again in Chicago. But Yalmerson surprised. That was more of a like he's the guy that gets moved to clear cap space. Just knowing, the analytics and knowing how good of a defenseman he is, and how much. Again, Brent Seabrook is getting older. Get off of that train while you still can.
He's a full mode, no movement.
And that's probably it. That's probably why the full
looking at it, and I was just sitting there. He gets paid more. He gets like $1 million plus more than Duncan Keith.
I wonder why. I wonder if though Dale Talon asked about Brent Seabrook. I'm sure he did, especially seeing Demers was exposed in the expansion draft. I mean, if I was Stan Bowman, I would have done Demers for Seabrook straight up and had no qualms about that. Your defense is probably getting better by doing that.
Debates. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
But the full no move there. Yeah, Yalmerson was the big shock for me of the three. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think that was definitely a shock. I was surprised it was both Stepan and Ronta going in the same deal. I thought if they were going to get traded, it would have been for separate assets, so to speak. And we'll get into my rants on the Rangers later. But I'm saving my overall assumptions and breakdowns of that trade to see what the Rangers do with free agency, because I think it could turn out to be a very good trade, and I think it could turn out to be a disastrous trade. So it depends on what they wind up doing here, Marcus. As we move on to trades, those trades, all shocking in their own rights, sort of made sense, sort of had to be done. The next two ones, Marcus, I'm going to mention, I don't know what the hell is going on. First, we're going to bring up the St. Louis Blues acquire Braden Shen for forward Yori Laterra, a first-round pick in 2017, which is the 27th overall, and a 2018 first-round pick conditionally there, Marcus. That shit crazy. I don't know what is going on. I don't know what the thought process. Braden Shen, nice player, but you basically almost gave up like 2 first in like quality like top 6 forward. I mean, like a decent hockey player, top 9 at the very least.
Right. It feels like you gave up it feels like you kind of gave up extra picks for someone who may or may not be better than the person you're sending the other. Like, I don't know how. Is there a huge
trade would have been like, all right, like,
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But to throw in the picks, I was like, good for Philly though. That's a great trade.
Just a
great trade for Hextall and the Flyers, who's I think he's developing a reputation as a really good trader. He's getting good.
The Flyers used to do stupid things, and now they're doing smart things. And I hate it. And we move on, Marcus, to one of the most baffling trades I've ever seen in my life. Pittsburgh acquires – and for the record, Puckleheads inside scoop. We talked about that quote that was given in the last week's episode by Penguins management there about maybe needing to get tougher and stuff. And that's what they do. Acquire Ryan Reeves and a second-round pick from St. Louis for Oscar Sundqvist, a mid-tier prospect from Pittsburgh, and a first-round pick, number 31 overall. Now it's a 20-pick differential there, Marcus.
And that pick became Klim Kostin, who, I wrote a little bit about prospects over at fearthefin.com. You can check out my work there, as always. Shameless plug. I wrote about Kostin. He was a very highly ranked prospect coming into the season, slipped because of a shoulder injury that made him miss the last, 2 or 3 months of the year. He also didn't score a ton of points as a 17-year-old playing in the KHL, playing professionally. The guy has captained Russia in the World Juniors multiple times. He's told reporters leading up to the draft that he doesn't want to play in Russia again. He doesn't want to play in junior. He wants to play in the AHL or the NHL next year. You have to love that attitude from a prospect, especially with that skill. And that was a prospect that would have been perfect for Pittsburgh, as I tweeted the night of the draft. They could have waited on his development. There's absolutely no need to rush him given where the team stands right now. And that could have been one of your pieces to prepare you for a world without Sidney Crosby. Instead, you move down 20 picks and you get an enforcer who you don't need. I understand, and I'm seeing a lot from Penguins fans. Maybe it's just the Penguins fans I follow that they needed help I mean, like that Crosby wasn't, now he's not going to get pushed around. Guess what? Ryan Reeves didn't prevent the St. Louis Blues from getting pushed around. You think about the guys that have gotten run or hit from behind or knee.
Backus comes to mind.
While Ryan Reeves was on the roster, like, I'm not saying that he should, skate out of the ice and hit someone, but it seems like teams had no problem taking liberties with the St. Louis Blues. I don't understand this trade for Pittsburgh at all.
Oh, Marcus, he is coming off a career year with 7 goals and 6 assists and a career high 13 points. So maybe
he's probably the best actual player of enforcers in the league, or one of the better ones. The guy can skate. He's a big guy, but they didn't need that. There's other ways to add toughness without adding an enforcer. And then to give up a guy like Costin, who, like I said, before the year was one of the top ranked skaters in the draft. And I think he was still, if I'm not mistaken, the top ranked European skater according to Central Scouting at the end of the year, even considering the injuries. And that guy went 31st overall, fell to the Penguins' lap, and they traded out. It was stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it makes this trade then, it helps swallow the pill a little bit for St. Louis giving up 2 first-round picks in the Braden Shen trade. Just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The Penguins have won 2 Stanley Cups pretty much in the past 2 years here, back-to-back, for pretty much playing the complete opposite type of hockey that Ryan Reeves can play. So I think that's the most puzzling part. But we heard the quote. It was just
they had Sestito last year. He didn't play.
Well, the Sestitos have never played hockey in their careers, so. Yeah,
Costin was the top-ranked European skater according to NHL Central Scouting, even with injuries.
So hey, we'll see.
They could have gotten 31st overall.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, guys. By the way, seriously, if you, I will say, if you haven't read Marcus's his little prospect stuff, he does a nice little job over there. It's I try to read everything I can about prospects, and yours is part of the stuff I read here.
It was a lot of watching YouTube videos, reading other people's scouting reports,
when you're not traveling to Europe anytime soon. So I mean, right. That's the best way to do it. And with every Ranger draft pick, I did the same exact thing. I said I went on YouTube, found as much highlights as I possibly could, read as much as I could, and that's all you could really do at this point. I mean, there's guys, there's only a handful of guys who get paid to actually do that. So I mean,
I just love that it makes me then made me fall in love with prospects like scouts who have been paid to watch them for years. I'm standing for Klim Kostin on this. The Sharks didn't draft players that I hadn't heard of before writing about them, and I'm like, dang it, why didn't they take this guy?
Oh, then you start.
I knew about him.
I did the same thing when the Rangers drafted 7th overall Elias Anderson. I'm reading top 10, they trade in, and I'm like, all right, top 10 picks. I'm like, oh, I want Glass. I want this guy. And then I'm sitting there, I'm like, damn it, why do they think? And then I started reading about him, and I was like, all right, actually, this guy's probably a decent pick.
We should. Do you want to then transition to the draft and some of the picks that came?
Yeah,
through?
absolutely. Well, one more trade, Marcus, we got to touch on is the Travis Hamonic trade.
Yes. So Calgary, second day of the draft trade.
Yeah, that's day of the draft here. After that, it was mostly just picks exchanged for picks and picks and picks. The last big name to go, though, day of the draft, Travis Hamonic and a conditional 4th from the Islanders for a 2018 first, a 2018 second, and then also a conditional 2nd-round pick there. Marcus, big trade from Calgary. Hamonic, as we talked about, has always wanted to go west towards his family. He's had that issue with a couple years. I think Calgary probably has to look at a team like Pittsburgh and the Predators, and see that top 4 blue line and say, you know what, that's what it's going to be to succeed. And good for Calgary. I mean, I know it's a lot to give up, but I think they brought in a pretty good player.
Yeah, I like the trade for both teams. I think he was a guy who wanted out of the Islanders, and I think they would have loved to keep him, but they got a decent haul for him. And I think the Flames prospect depth is good enough. The Flames prospect depth is good enough where you can afford to give up some of those picks. And, I think Nashville is absolutely their model. They probably have the best blue line outside of Nashville in the Western Conference. I think,
it's debatable. Yeah. Top 4. I mean, obviously Mark Giordano and then Dougie Hamilton, TJ Brody, and Travis Hamonic, all on pretty good deals too. Hamonic, 3 more years at 3.8575. Brody at about 4.6, and Dougie Hamilton, the big suitor, at 5.75. Obviously, Giordano, the biggest one, at 6.7, but he's been around a little bit longer, so it makes more sense. Only thing they don't have now is a goaltender, Marcus.
Right. I mean, the Mike Smith deal is
hoping to hold on to the puck. I mean,
he's going to have no excuse for struggling, given how good that blue line is. And Hamonic's had some struggles the last few years. He has shown some signs of decline, but he's going to be properly slotted in Calgary. He's not going to be asked to do too much. They have horses they can rely on over him. I mean, he's probably the fourth best defenseman on that team. I'd say behind Hamilton, behind Giordano, and behind Bodie, or is it Bodie or Brody? I always forget.
TJ Bodie.
Bodie, that's right. So, he's probably the fourth.
That's Brody. So that's Brody. There's a Bodie in the NHL somewhere.
And, he was probably the second best defenseman for the Islanders behind Nick Leddy. Like, is that – and probably asked to perform that way. Yeah, I like it for the Isles. It makes it you kind of question then, why did they bring in Jordan Eberle? If you're going to then get rid of a defenseman, are you really helping, appeal to the Tavares camp? But, maybe Garth Snow has some more moves up his sleeve. I think it was a little more questionable than the Eberle deal, but I still liked it for him. He wanted to leave, get the nice haul, get the good haul for him of picks. And those are going to be, decent picks in the next couple of years. I was a fan of that trade. I think what is most interesting, though, is Arthur Staples of Newsday reported that the Avalanche and Islanders had a deal on the table that would have sent Hamonic, a first-round pick, and a prospect to the Avs. The Islanders would have sent that in exchange for Matt Duchene. So now that Hamonic's off the table, that could potentially, if that's the framework, that could open up some other teams to potentially trading for Matt Duchene. I obviously wrote about it if you're the Finn from the Sharks' perspective, potentially giving up, a Justin Braun, a prospect, and a pick, and a first-round pick next year in exchange for Duchene. Maybe now they're a little more desperate in that downgrades to a Brendan Dillon, and you throw in another, lower-end prospect. I think it's very interesting because now that the Islanders are seemingly out of the picture for Matt Duchene, and they seemed like a really good fit for him, I wonder what other teams, Nashville has been floated out, but Nashville does not want to give up a single top four defenseman, and rightfully so. They made the Cup final last year. Now they're going to be healthy. I wouldn't make any changes if I were the Predators. How do you see this trade affecting the Matt Duchene, the Matt Duchene sweepstakes?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think the Islanders would have been a nice fit. They don't have a ton of cap space now. They got a projected about $9 million plus, according to Cap Friendly, a little bit over that. They already got 20 men signed to contracts, so it seems that are going to be pretty much shoo into the roster. Calvin DeHaan's an RFA. I would imagine they're going to want to bring him back. Marcus, he had a nice season for them. He's been a nice little piece for them. Won't be too pricey, but he's going to do an upgrade. You got to be assuming $3.5, $4 million could be in that range for Calvin DeHaan, anywhere in $3 to $4 million range. That's some money right there. I don't know if they're going to have the money to get Duchene, unless, and depends on who they're giving back in the trade as well. Could they convince them to take? I would imagine Colorado wants D help. Who do you move on the back end? Can you convince them maybe throwing DeHaan in the trade on top of Casey Cizikas and throwing some other stuff? I don't see it happening. It now sounds like, Marcus, that Pittsburgh is the leading candidate to get Matt Duchene. That's the one who's kicking the tires on it. I thought Duchene would have been a nice fit until they got Eberle. Not that he's the same position, but just because he's that, so to speak, game-changing forward up front that the Islanders could desperately use. But I question now, with the roster already built the way it is, who are you moving and who is the cap space coming from to really bring him in? That Andrew Ladd contract looks worse by the day. And so does the Kyle Clutterbuck one. That's money right there that could have been used to brought him in. I don't necessarily see it happening anymore.
Yeah, I think it's strange for the Islanders. Considering that's the reported Hamonic deal, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he would have wanted to go to the Avalanche, and maybe he didn't. But if he did, I think I would have rather had the Duchene deal.
I'm with you. I would have rather had Duchene, but maybe they stack the first-round picks, unless Colorado wants to just really blow the whole thing up and rebuild. Maybe they want picks out of it. Maybe you throw a couple picks that way. They now have a couple picks. They got 2 first-round picks this year. Next year, they got 2 second-round picks next year. Maybe you could sacrifice, a first in this year's draft, a first in next year's draft, and a second or something like that, and a prospect, right, and you bring in Duchene. It's still a possibility for them. But I think it's definitely hurts them, especially given their cap situation. With a little bit over $9 million. I believe Duchene is making about $6 million for 2 more years, if my memory serves correct. So it's not necessarily like they'll have much wiggle room outside of Duchene unless they move a contract the other way. Yeah, 2 more years, $6 million for Duchene.
Yeah, so I would have I would have considered that. But, Hamonic had some power there, and I think they wanted to do right by him. And Calgary was definitely one of the teams that was one of the teams he was linked to when he first demanded a trade. So it was interesting then. We should finally get to the draft and some of the picks we saw. I admit I wrote a little bit about the prospects, but still don't feel like I knew really anything about this incoming draft class. What picks stood out to you? Any good ones, bad ones, both for the Rangers and for the rest of the league?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Rangers obviously having 2 first-round picks. I think the more I read about them, they're both young. The Rangers pretty much went Elias Anderson out of Sweden, 18 years old. More safe pick. I mean, he's a guy who actually could contend for that maybe fourth-line center role this year. Everything I've read about him is this guy is not going to be – you're not going to get a 60-point guy out of him, but he's going to turn into pretty much your prototypical second-line center, 40, 45 points, can play power play, can play penalty kill, can play 20 minutes a night. And it makes sense when they take a guy like him because then they go with their 21st overall pick. And I just had it up here. I just want to get the guy's name right so I can pronounce it. Filip Chytil from the Czech Republic. He's only 17 years old, Marcus, and played in the Czech A last year. So a lot of potential. He's more of a guy who they see growing into a potential role, high-end, high-risk reward kind of thing. Doesn't turn 18 till September, so he's one of the younger players in the drafts. Plenty of time for him to develop. He's a guy you see down the line, so he's a little more high skill. As far as the rest of the draft goes, the Nico Nolan debate going throughout the whole time.
Actually, we're Team Nico.
Yeah, Team Nico, that's right. To the Devils, Nolan Patrick to the Flyers. Really don't think either team could have gone wrong. I think I like everything from a Devils perspective. I like everything that Nico Hischier is saying. He's excited. He's been making his round. He was at a Red Bull game this past week. He was at a Yankee game. There's already signs on the Jersey Turnpike welcoming him to New Jersey. I think that's exciting. Marcus, the 3 and 4 picks were probably my 2 favorite picks in the draft, and they were defensemen. Miro Heiskanen going to Dallas, and then Cal Maker over to Colorado. Dallas, Marcus, I think might have had one of the best drafts of anybody in the draft. From what they did, they get basically the best defenseman in the draft, and Heiskanen that can be debated a little bit with Maker, who also went to Colorado. 2 big puck-moving, skating defensemen are going to be able the guys who are going to play 25 minutes a night. Then Dallas trades up and takes Boston University's Jack Oettinger, who's arguably was one of the better goaltenders in the draft. Overall. A good goaltender there. And then Jason Robertson, who's another one of the draft scorers, another guy who's just like one of those classic junior guys who puts up a ton of points in the second round. For a team that actually isn't necessarily, Marcus, that far away, it doesn't happen that often to a team like Dallas. So this is a blessing in disguise this past year could be for them when you look at bulking up their roster going forward. They pretty much, almost got nearly 3 first-round draft picks out of this draft with the way they approached things. I was very pleased with what Dallas did going forward there. And then Vegas, 3 first-round picks. I think you have to be pleased if you're a Vegas Golden Knights. I know we touched on it before, but you got to be happy with them going forward. And you talk about Suzuki. I haven't seen a ton of him, but everyone talks about he was lethal in the O last year. They really built up their roster very nicely. If you're Vegas looking to build a talent pool, as far as any surprises, I said I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know anybody crazy there. And Elias Anderson did surprise me for the Rangers there. And you talked about your boy who slipped all the way to 31 there, and Klim Kostin. One of my also talked about great names.
Great name,
Klim Kostin. I mean, that could be a Bond villain. There's got and him in Vegas. Where do you want to? No, sorry,
St. Louis.
St. Louis could be a nice fit for them. Makes up for a little bit, Marcus. But yeah, the problem is, right, you start reading about these draft picks, and I think the hardest thing about when you look at prospects is who you're comparing them to, Marcus.
Right.
And you have guys like, who is he comparable to? Well, he's comparable to Ryan Getzlaf. And then all of a sudden that sets an expectation, right? It's like, oh, this is Ryan. No, he's just comparable. He similar.
Plays like him. Yeah.
He plays like him at his level. That's where he's elite. It doesn't mean he's necessarily going to turn into him. Fun draft. I love the NHL draft. It's a fun time, exciting stuff.
Yeah, I also a couple picks I want to highlight. Eli Tovanen going to the Nashville Predators, another guy that slipped. Central Scouting had him as the 8th best skater that played in North America last year. He went all the way to 30 for Nashville. Perfect pick for them. They've got prospects. They can afford to wait and have him kind of emerge as some of these other guys are maybe on the downswing of their careers. Really, really like the Kyler Yamamoto pick for the Oilers.
He's a good one.
You want to talk about a high upside boomer bust type pick. Guy has 227 points in the WHL. Yes, he's small. He's 5'7", 146 pounds, but he's drawn a lot of comparisons to Tyler Johnson, who also played in Spokane. Yamamoto trained with Tyler Johnson's mom in Spokane, and Tyler Johnson's spoken highly of him. They're losing Jordan Eberle, but they very well could have his replacement developed. I think Yamamoto is going to take a little bit of time, but he was a guy I would have liked the Sharks to go for at 19. Their pick, really didn't know anything about him. Josh Norris, apparently he had a great draft combine. Knowing what I know from any other sport, always worrisome when you select a guy who rose on draft boards because of how well he did at the combine. But he led the U.S. national team development program in scoring last year, 51 points in 52 games. Not a bad player. 34th ranking the Central Scouting had. The biggest thing I had with the Sharks was they didn't have a lot of picks, and their first two picks, I shouldn't have been surprised, but their first two picks were what I like to call safe reaches. They're guys with low ceilings but high floors, and they reached on those picks regardless. I think they would have been available. The Sharks didn't have a pick until I think they traded back into the fourth round with the Rangers, but they weren't scheduled to have a pick until the fifth round. These were opportunities for them to trade down and recoup some picks. Maybe, obviously I'm not privy to the discussions, so maybe they weren't going to have an opportunity to do that. But when you see some of these rankings, and that's all the information I have publicly available, it's a little frustrating to see that. But they took some chances on some guys late in the draft, and they've had a lot of success doing that. Joe Pavelski, Dylan DeMello, Kevin LeBanc, Danny O'Regan are all going to play roles for them next year. Those guys were all drafted after the fifth round and later. So, it was a little surprising in that sense. Really like Carolina's draft too. I like Nick Nekach. I think he's a good player for them. And I think maybe the biggest surprise for me was seeing Callan Foote go so high. I was expecting him.
I didn't expect it. He was the same one. There's another one whose name probably is a little bit better. I mean, probably a first round pick, Marcus. I saw most projections have him in mid-20s though. Yeah,
same. And or maybe the late teens. 14 was a little high from Tampa Bay. But yeah, and as you mentioned, Vegas, I mean, you got it. Not enough can be said about their draft. They had an awesome night. I think, of course, Toronto too had another one. Timothy Liljegren. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. He missed a month with mono in November and fell on some draft boards, but there were people saying that the Leafs might have gotten the best defenseman available. So the rich keep getting richer.
Naturally, it always seems to be the way, isn't it, Marcus? Marcus, also yes. Talking about the draft, it's something to note. Obviously, the first time ever, a Swiss-born first overall draft pick.
Yes.
And then Finland dominating the first 3 rounds of the draft. Yes. I think it is only healthy for hockey when now Finland, who was for a long time was a peak, one of the top teams, top countries for Australian talent. It's kind of fallen off the map a little bit. Starting to come back, it looks like. And I think with Switzerland, that's only going to be great for growing the game of hockey. Just something else to note as just, I said, we're all ambassadors of hockey. I think it's always awesome when you see guys from non-traditional countries or markets come out of here. And Nico, he's saying all the right things. He seems like a really good kid. And, the Devils, they have plenty of room for error, if you will, in the fact that they're not necessarily a team that's contending right now. I'm very curious to see if he winds up playing on the roster next year. It honestly wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, no, I think they're going to probably give him every opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
To make the team. Some other history being made. First time the Sharks drafted 2 California-born prospects in the same draft. None of them from Northern California, but still cool nonetheless. They didn't draft the Californian I wanted though. He was still available in the second round. Like I said, a guy who I had researched moments before writing a piece, and then all of a sudden I was like, dang it, I know more than their scouting department. They should have picked him. They're going to rue the day. But yeah, I want to say the draft was a little disappointing though in terms of movement. We got some trades, but we didn't see any of the big fish move that we expected.
I thought more would happen. I agree. I think there was some more. We talk about Duchesne and what Colorado was possibly going to do there. And also, I guess Eberle is the guy from Edmonton. I was kind of curious to see if Edmonton was going to make more moves to try to make more cap space. I thought they could have, at least could have tried to. Maybe they did. Who really knows? But, it's always a fun time on draft day. And wonder what was going on the floor. The drafts the trades that almost were probably there, Marcus. Good times. I mean, so much to talk about. We still haven't even touched on free agency here. So, yes. Marcus, why don't we get into free agency? Little predictions. Saturday at noon.
Well, we got to talk about the one contract that's already been signed. That will probably take the title of the worst contract signed for free agency.
Oh my God! I tried to put it out of my mind so much, Marcus, because it was such a crap contract a crap deal, as the Men in Blazers would say. And Marcus, of course, referring to the Washington Capitals signing TJ Oshie himself, TJ Oshie to. Look at this! Oh, I'm playing some video over here or something as I click. It's like someone talking about Marc-Andre Fleury. I was like, I don't need to hear about Marc-Andre Fleury. I have 8 years, 5.875. I believe that is the contract. Let me double check here.
TJ
5.75. Excuse me. I gave him an extra $100,000 per year. Modified no trade clause. The guy is 30 years old. Marcus, this is one of your favorite guys to rant about in the NHL, so I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
I call him TJ Oshie because the last 2 years his percentages have been spiking because he's played with the Washington Capitals. Dmitry Filipovich had a great tweet. He said if Oshie had shot his career average the last 2 years, like last year, he would have scored 17 goals with the Capitals. That's not a guy you've signed an 8-year deal to. You already have Burakovsky coming up. You've got Kuznetsov. You've got young players coming up. You gave it a chance. Great. Now you sign him to an 8-year deal. Look, there were guys that they could have gotten during free agency for cheaper. Maybe they sign Alex Radulov and bring in one of Ovi's countrymen if they really feel like they needed to bring in top-end scoring. The cap hit isn't terrible for Oshie. I'll give the deal that. But the cap hit's only not terrible because he signed for 8 years. That's not a guy you give an 8-year contract to. You give 8-year contracts to Nicholas Backstrom, Evgeny Kuznetsov. If Ovechkin was up for a contract at any point, instead of having signed a 13-year deal, you probably gave him an 8-year contract. Like TJ Oshie, career 13.4% shooter. 2 years in Washington, he shot 18%. He shot 23.1% last year. This, despite attempting 70 less shot attempts. He did play 12 fewer games, of course. 70 less shot attempts, 42 fewer shots on goal. That doesn't seem like a guy who's going to age well and is going to make that contract look worthwhile. I think there's a chance he doesn't score 20 goals next year, and there's a great chance he doesn't score 25. I don't understand this move for the Capitals. They could have retooled on the fly, taken some chances on some flyer type players. Maybe you bring in Bo Bennett, Nail Yakupov, give them a chance in a team, on 1-year deals. I really don't. This reeks of like a saving face move to appease a fan base because TJ Oshie's not that good. He's good, but he's not 8 years, 40 whatever $1 million a year good.
Yeah, it's a move that doesn't make any sense for Washington, who are a team that is aging automatically with the Stars, Marcus, and now they just signed another aging one who's easily past his prime as far as his scoring totals will probably be. I said that the Capitals should fold the franchise if they didn't win the Stanley Cup this year. Well, what are you doing? Just forget it. And clearly, as we learned, Marcus, Washington can't do anything right. So on all fronts here, we'll move in.
They don't deserve Ovi. They don't.
No, they don't. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve Ovi at this point. Maybe Ovi doesn't deserve them either at this point. They haven't never seemingly put the right. This year was the best bet they had, and they weren't able to pull the trigger. Marcus, we get into free agency here.
Heck, give that deal to Shattenkirk instead of Oshie. Oh my God!
Yes, please. Well, he didn't have a great playoffs for them, so he's gone, obviously. So the rest of his career isn't good enough to justify that.
Correct.
So, that's right. We get into free agency here. Marcus, I gotta assume Kevin Shattenkirk is the #1 guy on everyone's board. Put up 56 points last year as a defenseman, 28 years old, right-handed, first pairing defenseman. pretty legit as they come. Going to be taking a lot of money. You also got guys like Alexander Radulov, who's up there. Doesn't sound like him and Montreal are going to come to an agreement. He wants some hella dollars here. Had a very nice year in Montreal, 54 points, 18 goals, 36 and 76. A couple guys out of San Jose, and Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau, Marcus. So we'll let you talk about them in a little bit. A Flyer guy who I think is going to get a nice little pay grade, and Sam Gagner, who had a great year in Columbus, coming off a basically league minimum deal. After that, though, Marcus said the value of a free agency, man, it's going to be interesting to watch people overpay, especially with that extra $2 million. Guys like Chris Stieg, Martin Hansel, Thomas Vanek could get a nice contract. He's still a pretty competent player at the right place. Does Chris Kunitz get overpaid? Does he play? Does someone sign Shane Doan or Jerome McGinley or Matt Cullen? I'm not really sure. The free agency pool really drops off, Marcus. I think you're hopefully, from our team's perspective, you could see some good Flyer players here. Who are some guys you really you think are locked into certain areas? Who you think is going to be overpaid? Anything like that you want to bring up?
I think a guy who's not being talked about as an overpayment candidate who has a very good chance of getting overpaid is Nick Bonino.
I knew you were going to bring it. Yeah, I was going to say for sure.
As he was the third line center behind Malkin and Crosby in Pittsburgh. Not his fault, but he was very, very good in that role with the Pittsburgh Penguins in the playoffs last year, and frankly this year before he got hurt. He was on his way to having another really nice postseason. He had 37 points this year. 29 last year in 17 less games. He had 7 points in 21 postseason games this year, 18 and 24 last year. If you're a team that needs middle six center help, I think Nick Bonino's a guy, you shouldn't sign him expecting him to be a top center. And I don't think he's going to sign anywhere expecting himself to be a top center. But if you're a team in need of middle six center depth, I think Nick Bonino would be a really interesting piece. Depending on how the cap works, maybe he goes to a team like Nashville. He just played them in the Cup final. I think he'd be a great fit.
Oh, you talk about center day. He's one of the guys I would have on my board if I'm on the New York Rangers.
Yeah, and I think he could. I think he could definitely help the Rangers. You play him and Zibanejad together as your 1-2. And you hope Zibanejad can take the next step. If the Sharks don't retain Thornton and Marleau, he's a guy I'd be interested. 100%. I think he's got overpayment potential because of where he's coming from. We've seen this happen with guys that played in Chicago, whether Chicago overpaid them or other teams did. When you have that Cup pedigree, you're going to get a lot more money. I'm interested to see what Justin Williams does. 35 years old, still very productive last year with 48 points. Is he going to go to another team? The Kings never really replaced him. Does he go back to Los Angeles? I'm interested to see what happens to Yogs. I think he's still going to be a good top 9 forward next year as a 45, 46-year-old.
Vegas.
I'm hoping he comes to the Sharks. I'd love that. But I think the big fish that can change it all are Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau.
Marcus, you have any inside there from over with working with your Finn? What's the rumors going on over there?
I mean, the latest rumor that I wrote up yesterday is that the Kings reached out to Joe Thornton, which would pretty much be the nightmare scenario for any Sharks fans if he went to Los Angeles. Look, I was going to write about it previously when weren't coming back. The Sharks said so. They said, we're not bringing back Dan Boyle. They traded his rights. They did the same thing with Yevgeny Nabokov. They've not done that with Thornton and Marleau yet. They've not said that they're not coming back. They said they want to work it out, but they've got other guys they need to sign. And it seems like from all the reports that Thornton's preference is to stay in San Jose and his preference is to play with Patrick Marleau. I think the difference between the Sharks and their camps is going to come down. I think the Sharks are going to be willing to give each of them at least a 1-year deal. It seems like they're more hesitant to give Marleau a 2-year deal. I'd give both of them matching 2-year, $10 million total contracts, $5 million annually. Maybe you try and get that elsewhere. I think they come back. I think Marleau could get a 3-year deal elsewhere. I could also see Thornton, but I'd be very hesitant giving him a 3-year deal coming up. If I'm any team, yes, for all intents and purposes, it looks like he's going to be good at camp. But he played on an injured knee and looked good, but he's 37 years old. I don't think it's reasonable to expect him to be at the same level he was before the injury. I think the Rangers would be a good fit for Thornton and Marlowe, frankly. I think Toronto would be an excellent fit for both players. They have some cap space if you want to bring them in on 2-year deals. Babcock loves both of them. I think the Predators could be an interesting fit for Thornton, too. I've seen some talk about, Thornton should go to Pittsburgh and be the third-line center. If they could get Thornton for cheaper than Nick Bonino, and he wants to win a ring, that'd be pretty awesome for the Penguins. I'd be Weave as well as Marlowe. I think they're both still good players. Marlowe still scored 27 goals last year. He scored 20 goals the year before that. He's still a good NHL winger. He might, be a second, third line tweener as opposed to a lock in the top 6, but there's value in that. I hope the Sharks work something out and are able to bring those guys back, but it's got to be at the right term and the right dollar amount for them to come to San Jose. If it is the right term and the dollar amount, though, I don't see them leaving for a pay cut elsewhere. I don't see them doing the Teemu Selanne, Paul Kariya, go to the Avalanche for a year and reunite kind of a thing. So I think and this is with no inside information, I've done no reporting on this, I would peg Thornton's return at 75-25, and I would peg Marlowe's at closer to 50-50.
Really? Okay, interesting.
But there's a lot of reports that Thornton is trying to get Marlowe back too. So if the Sharks decide to let Marlowe walk, I think Thornton's chances of returning are 50-50.
Interesting dynamic there. I mean, and do the Sharks still view themselves as a contender out west, Marcus?
That's the question, right? That's the question.
To me, that's the biggest question regarding those two, right? End of their careers, they've done everything they possibly could in San Jose. They brought them to a cup within 2 wins of a finals. They've got their accolades, they got their goal scoring, they got their points, all that jazz. To me, it's also a debate of whether, and families have a big debate on this too, right? I mean, these are older
young families.
They have families who have been established in that area for years and years and years. Marcus, another interesting tidbit, and I don't think he'll do it yet, but Joe Thornton's wife is from Switzerland.
Yep.
He has talked about finishing his career up over there, which he did in the 04-05 lockout.
And the 2012 lockout.
And the 2012 lockout. There you go. Both over there. He's over in Switzerland.
With Rick Nash.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting debate. For the Rangers' perspective, for 1 year, if Thornton was able to come for 1 year, I'd give him 5.5. If it was a 2-year deal, I'd probably lower it. I talked about the Dan Boyle contract, 2 years, $4.5 million. Would he do that? I would not give him 3 years. I wouldn't give either one of them 3 years. Frankly, either one of them could come on a 1 or 2 year deal. I think it would kind of make sense to kind of buy time as Zibanejad really takes into that role. And if you move either Kevin Hayes or JT Miller back to center full time, they could learn from those two. I think it would really help either one of them to come over. And Marcus, outside of these guys here, we talked about the big guns, pretty underwhelming free agency market. And
I agree. I think there's a huge chance some of these guys get overpaid.
Oh, a huge chance. I mean, look at a guy like Thomas Vanek, who's a nice piece at $2.6 million, but how much are you going to give Thomas Vanek in the long run? And these guys who want multi-year deals, are you willing to give that to them? I think he's going to be hesitant. I think probably maybe the deepest position, though, Marcus, might be center. If you look at it from a free agency perspective. Joe Thornton, Sam Gagner, Mike Fisher, you got to assume he's probably going to stay in Nashville. Do
you think he retires?
I think there's an outside chance he could retire, but he's still pretty effective. I mean, he had 42 points last year. He
was good in the playoffs, too.
He's still a good hockey player. I could see Fisher on a one more year, maybe 2 more years as a captain of that Predators team that still has so many young pieces, trying to lead them in that emotional sense, even if he's nothing crazy. He was at $4 million as a cap hit. His cap hit was 4.5. I think that'll drop. 2 years at $3 million a year for Mike Fisher, I still think is a pretty reasonable contract. I don't think that'd be anything crazy. Talk about Bonino. I think Matt Cullen's probably going to finally call it quits, so it makes sense. Other guys, Brian Boyle, a guy who clearly was valuable in Toronto. I think he's due for an overpayment as well, Marcus. I think that's a guy who could probably wind up getting overpaid somewhere down the line here. And then maybe some depth pieces. I mean, look at Alexander Burmistrov out of Phoenix. I'm still a big Brandon Peary fan. The Rangers aren't going to bring him back. There's some guys to be had. But with the $2 million cap escrow, it hit the expansion draft, moves being made. there's going to be so many overpayments that'll help lead into the next NHL lockouts.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm intrigued to see what Radulov gets. I think
that's the big one. I wonder, does anybody really going to invest long term in Alexander Radulov?
I don't know if I'd give him term, but I think I'd give him a high. If I was a team that needed scoring, if he was willing, I'd give him, $8 million a year for 3 years, or maybe $7 million a year for 4. I think if you can sign him to the same contract TJ Oshie signed, I think I'd rather have Radulov than TJ Oshie.
Yeah, it's a tough debate, but Radulov probably a little more high-end skill than Oshie does.
Right.
I don't know. Radulov's also a guy who's a little bit older. I don't know how much money I'd really be willing to give him. How much term I'd be willing to give him. I'd much rather be happy, like you said, 3 years at $7 million. I could live with that for Radulov if he's going to give you.
I'd pay the premium for him over a shorter term as opposed to a
So would I, especially with the cap going up and what's going on. I'd rather pay short term, a little bit more money up front for Radulov than I wouldn't sign him. He's also north of 30, so I wouldn't necessarily be the kind of person to be dishing out 8-year contracts to 30-year-olds unless their name is maybe Sidney Crosby or something.
And I'm also, I think one of the more intriguing names too is going to be Ryan Miller. There seems to have been some links to him to the Ducks. His wife is from Southern California and lives there. I mean, he'd be a great backup for John Gibson if you're the Ducks. Big reason they lost is probably because Jonathan Bernier wasn't good enough when Gibson went down. They want to have a proven goaltender in back of him. You could do a heck of a lot worse than Ryan Miller there. It's a decent class in terms of goaltenders. It's not amazing. It's not. I wouldn't say it's awful either. It's nothing like next year. Next year is going to be absurd if some of these guys actually go to free agency next year. If cap friendly would just load.
I got you. Carey Price, Jarl Halak, Craig Anderson, Martin
Bobrovsky, right? Or is he 2019? Is Bobrovsky 2019?
Bobrovsky. Yeah, Bobrovsky's got to be the year after because he's not. Yeah, he's got to be 2019, 20. Yeah, he's there. And then that would pack Arena, Sammy Varlamov, Jimmy Howard, Marc-Andre Fleury. So there's some guys there towards the future.
Yeah, so that'll be that's going to be a lot more fun than this year's class. I mean, Keith Kincaid maybe. I still doubt we see any offer sheets. We haven't seen any under the new CBA since Ryan O'Reilly, and that was 4 years ago now. If there's anyone to get offer sheeted, I would say it's probably going to be Leon Draisaitl. I think it makes the most sense. You want to limit Edmonton's ability to run away with titles going forward. I think you do that. I think a smart team would maybe offer sheet Ryan Johansson too, especially if negotiations prolong with the Predators. You could maybe throw a wrench into some of their plans. I'm just trying to think like competitively speaking. Those are the two biggest names I think by far in terms of restricted free agents, unless I'm missing.
You got some guys
too. Pasternak too. It'll be interesting to see.
Pasternak, you got Palat, Johnson, Kuznetsov, Alex Galchenyuk, and there's already been some floats of him even getting traded out of Montreal. What if someone came in and swooped into them and tried to lock him up? Some nice pieces overall, though, actually. Thomas Tatar is in RFA. So there's some guys, Niederreiter. The RFA class is certainly more impressive than the UFA class. So I would love to see some RFA contracts being thrown around.
Me too.
It's a strategy that teams that have cap space and draft picks need to take more advantage of. We talked about Vegas doing it. We always talk about a team now. Carolina's certainly improved themselves a little bit, but a team like Carolina could potentially do it. The Devils could potentially do it. Teams that have this cap space, on all these draft picks, if you get a proven commodity and then you could, work away, if Carolina, say, were to do something like that and sign one of these guys, they got guys who they can wind up trading for draft picks and kind of restock a little bit if they need to, and in a Lee Stepniak or Derek Ryan, if you will. There's guys to move. Cam Ward's coming off the books. Maybe you can move him, something like that. So I wish it was used more often, Marcus, but we always talk about it. Everybody's afraid of making enemies, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And, another guy, Colton Parayko, is a restricted free agent. I think there's good players. Teams should use it more. I think, maybe you're not going to pay someone $10 million a year, and maybe Edmonton will probably match. As they've already said, they'll match anything. But if you go the max amount, then that could present some problems for them coming up here. as well. I predict 0 offer sheets though, because NHL GMs are cowards.
Yep, I agree.
Do you have any last minute free agency predictions before we shift quickly to the Hall of Fame class? Talk about that. Do you have who's going to be the most overpaid player on July 1st?
Overpaid player on July 1st.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, you can make the argument that Shattenkirk's going to get overpaid, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, in that sense that he's going to get overpaid. I don't think he's overpaid in the sense that we're talking about, though. I would say Martin Hansel will get overpaid.
I think it's going to be Dan Girardi. He's been linked to a lot of teams already.
I can't believe it. God.
He's going to get signed. He's going to get signed on the first day of free agency, I think, and any money given to him above the league minimum is going to be overpayment. So I think it's going to be Girardi.
Girardi or Martin Hansel. Those are two good picks.
Quickly before we head out, I think we should touch on the Hall of Fame class was announced this week. Teemu Selanne, Paul Kariya, Dave Andreychuk, Mark Recchi, Danielle Goyette,
I believe she's
Goyette, as players, and then as builders, the longtime coach of the University of Alberta, Claire Drake. And because the NHL has to memorialize their owners for having owned teams for a long time, Jeremy Jacobs, the architect of the last 2 lockouts, is also going to be inducted. Very happy to see Paul Kariya get
That's the one that, like, I mean, Teemu was obviously a shoo-in. We knew that. He's an all-time great. But Paul Kariya, long overdue. Marcus, I read a good article, and
was it Lozo?
Yes, about Kariya. Yeah, okay. No, you beat me to it. But
you should mention it, though, for the readers.
Yeah, no, it was just, listen, if you haven't read it, we love Dave Lozo here. Paul Kariya is just, and it makes me sad thinking about Paul Kariya, Marcus, because he kind of has had an estranged relationship with the Ducks since his retirement, how he was treated with his concussions, obviously. But I think Paul Kariya, Marcus, what I think of Paul Kariya is one of the first real superstars I could remember in their prime that I could kind of remember seeing as a young hockey player growing up. And obviously the Mighty Ducks and the movies, and that helps grow his nostalgia level, if you will. But Paul Kariya, 989 points in 989 games. Between concussions and knee injuries, his career was taken too soon from us, frankly. I'm very happy for Paul Kariya. Obviously, we talk about Teemu Selanne. And then another good article I was reading, but it was how NHL always seemingly they kind of frown upon longevity, Marcus. And Dave Andreychuk and Mark Recchi are 2 prime examples of that. Dave Andreychuk's been retired for a while, finally gets in here. All-time leading power play goal scorer, I believe, in NHL history, Dave Andreychuk, captain of that 03-04 Tampa Bay Lightning team. And then Mark Recchi, who seemingly did play forever. 2 guys who had long careers, which probably took away from, their point per game aspects. And in the middle of the careers, they're both very good hockey players. But I think you have to be happy for both of them. But the Kariya one is the one that makes me the most happy, I think.
Yeah, I do too. It's nice to see Andreychuk and Recchi get recognized. Both were very good at the end of their careers. I mean, Andreychuk was still a 25 goal scorer every year. He wasn't at the end of his career. He wasn't just this is the old guy looking for a ring. He was still a very effective player. Kariya, one of my favorite players growing up. Extremely happy to see him in the Hall of Fame. I think Lozo made some good points that, the standard has definitely been lowered in the Hall of Fame lately. But I do think Kariya probably deserved to get in before those standards as well. A point per game player in an era when the puck died. And he was one of the most dynamic offensive players, and his career would have been a heck of a lot more had he not been injured. So yeah, very happy to see Paul Kariya in there. I touched on it. Not very happy to see Jeremy Jacobs in there. I really don't understand that. I understand he's been the longtime owner of the Boston Bruins, but the memorializing of owners doesn't always make sense to me, and it especially doesn't when it's a guy who's been so heavily involved in work stoppages. And, he's a builder of the game as recognized by the Hall of Fame. But if anything, he's helped tear down what he's built by being the driving force behind those last 2 lockouts. You imagine where the NHL could be if they hadn't lost a year and a half's worth of games, twice in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And then we also get, of course, to Danielle Goyette, our female inductee here. Gold medal for Canada at Salt Lake City in 2002, in Turin in 2006, and silver in 1998. And then, gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 world championship gold medals and a silver as well to go in there. She also was a
Canada's all-time leading scorer there among women, I think. I'm not sure if it's also among men, but I didn't feel good enough to like write this down in an article, but doing some preliminary research, I think, keyword think, she's the all-time leading scorer for Canada at the Worlds, regardless of gender. I think.
Oh, she's got the longevity to do it for sure. Fantastic career for her. She's also done some coaching since then as well. She's University of Calgary, the women's program there. She coached for them for a while, the Canadian national team. She helped with the evaluation camp. So a woman around the game, and I am always for anybody who's going to grow the sport like she does, and clearly a prominent member of Canada for, oh gosh, a lot longer than I even realized, I think, Marcus. When I start looking at her credentials, it's pretty it's pretty remarkable, the amount of trophies and hardware she has. And when she retired, actually, at the age of 42, she was the oldest current member of Team Canada of all time, retiring at 42 after retirement in 2008. Still around the game, so good for her. I love that the NHL, frankly, has acknowledged, really has gotten females in there over the past decade plus. And especially when you look at the U.S. and Canada, the rivalry they have, that should be celebrated as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. She certainly did more to build the game than Jeremy Jacobs.
No, that's not, well, it shouldn't even be a debate, but unfortunately for some people it is.
And I don't mean to, keep ripping the guy, but it's just I'm very, very, very confused to see him there. But yeah, it was I think it's overall still a good class. Solani and Korea getting in for me outweighs any bad things in there. Looking forward to see him get inducted. Hopefully, his number will then follow suit in retirement.
I hope so. I hope so.
This fall. It's long overdue for him to be in the Hall of Fame. Longer overdue for his number to be retired. I know there was some bad blood there after he left after the Cup final run and went to the Avs, but he's arguably the second best, if not the best player in their franchise's history. So.
Yeah, absolutely here, Marcus. Well, a long show, but a fun one. A lot to cover here, folks. Of course, NHL, the players, we've seen some contracts.
We do have some little breaking news here, though, before we got to touch on it. Darren Dreger said, and this is according to the transcript by Nichols on Hockey. He's a NHL insider. That's in his title on his Twitter feed. I know the Rangers have interest in either Thornton or Marleau. They have interest in Nick Bonino. They're not giving Marleau or Joe Thornton a 3-year term. That is according to Darren Dreger.
Yeah, I'm looking at this contract right now. I just saw the tweet, actually. Chris Nichols, actually. Is that the guy you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting little tidbit there. You have to be intrigued. That's exciting to me.
And if they can't get a 3-year deal elsewhere, they're going to stay in San Jose.
That makes sense a lot to me. Once again, I'm not giving Marleau or Thornton more than – I'd have a hard-pressed time giving them 2 years. So, yeah. Sorry. My dad walked in the room.
Oh, you're fine. There you go. You're all good.
Figure out what he was trying to say. So, but yeah, that's a breaking news. Also, the Rangers, it sounds like they re-signed Brendan Smith today. That was another contract that came out. Nice contract. I like Brendan Smith. And you know what? If you gave up a second and third round pick for him, you're going to get 4.5 years out of him. I mean, that's a good investment in the long term. Helps out their top four. Look, nothing confirmed, but it looks like 4 years, 4.35 per year for Brendan Smith, who's not necessarily a shot producer, but he's actually one of the better shot suppressors in the NHL. Underrated that. And he doesn't put up the points, but he can actually move the puck pretty well. Still good skater, 28 years old. Market value, Marcus. Market value, that's probably would have gotten overpaid even more on the open market. So I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. Good going forward. We'll see the overpayments. Once again, folks, a lot of teams could talk to these guys right now, but July 1st, Saturday, at noon, Marcus. Have a happy 4th of July to everybody. Have a safe 4th of July. Uber, Lyft, get a ride. No drunken driving. Have a good time with it, Marcus.
Have a good Canada Day.
And when's Canada Day?
Saturday.
Is it? You know what? I'm going to show up to the 4th of July party I'm going to on Saturday, decked out in Canadian gear.
Yes, please do.
I think that's the way I have to do it, just to let everybody know where I'm at.
Please do.
Once again, folks, a great time. Thanks for listening. Marcus, a fun show. An informative show. A long show, a good one. I would say we'll give free agency about a week. We'll touch back base there, and we can tell you about all the money that should have been paid towards us to tell teams not to pay those players.
Yes.
We'll go from there.
And Connor will rant about the Rangers.
Oh, yes. We'll give my preview for the rant there. I'm not even going to do any rants today, Marcus. I'm going to save it all. I'm going to hold it in just so I could just go after him there. Exciting times for everybody. Happy 4th. Happy Canada Day. East Coast, West Coast. Marcus Way, Connor McNeilis. Bring back the whale. Signing off.
Thanks for watching, listening, or however you consume this. Bye.